It was late in the evening, the kind of night that made the whole world feel quiet and tired. The streets were almost empty, and the sound of the wind brushing against old shop signs echoed softly between the buildings. Streetlights flickered one by one as if they too were fighting sleep. A young woman named Amara was walking home from her shift at the hospital. She worked long hours as a nurse, and every step she took felt heavier than the last. Her back ached, her eyes burned from exhaustion, but she didn't mind much. Helping people was what she loved most about her life. She often said that even if her body complained, her heart always felt full at the end of the day. She lived alone in a small rented room not far from the hospital. The shortcut she took every night passed behind a few old shops and ended near a row of trash bins. It wasn't the prettiest walk home, but it saved her time. Most nights she walked through that narrow alley without giving it a second thought. But that night was different. Halfway down the alley, just as she was about to cross the street, she heard something. So faint she almost missed it. It wasn't a cat or a dog, at least not at first. It was a tiny, trembling sound like someone crying. Amara stopped walking. The street light above her blinked, leaving her in partial darkness for a moment. Then she heard it again, soft, weak, and heartbreaking. Her pulse quickened. She turned toward the sound, trying to listen more closely. The crying seemed to be coming from near one of the trash bins behind an old bakery. Her first thought was that maybe someone had abandoned a kitten. She carefully stepped closer, holding her breath, afraid to scare whatever was there. But as she moved the lid of one bin slightly, the sound became clearer, and suddenly she froze. That was not a kitten. It was the cry of a baby. Amara's whole body went cold. For a second, she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Then, in a rush, she dropped her bag and pushed the bin aside. There, wrapped in a torn gray blanket, lay a tiny baby. Barely a few days old, red-faced and shaking. The baby's hands were balled into little fists, its cries breaking the still air. Amara gasped. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice trembling. She knelt down quickly, her hands shaking as she reached for the baby. It's okay, I've got you." The blanket was damp and the baby's skin felt cold to the touch. Without thinking, Amara pulled off her own jacket and wrapped it around the small body. She looked around, hoping someone might appear, but the alley was empty. The only sound was the baby's weak, desperate crying. Her heart was pounding so hard it hurt. Who could do something like this? She whispered to herself, feeling anger and sadness mix inside her. She knew she couldn't waste a second. Holding the baby close to her chest, she started running toward the hospital. The streets were quiet, her shoes splashing through puddles as rain began to fall again. The baby's crying grew softer and fear gripped her chest. "Stay with me," she said softly. "Please stay with me." She tightened her hold, shielding the tiny face from the cold rain. By the time she reached the emergency entrance, her clothes were soaked. The security guard on duty looked startled as she burst through the doors. "It's a baby!" she cried. "Someone left a baby in the trash." Doctors and nurses rushed forward immediately. Amara gently handed the baby to one of the nurses, her hands still trembling. They took the child into the neonatal unit while Amara stood outside, shivering, her heart still racing. She could hear the sounds of hurried voices and medical machines from inside. Minutes felt like hours. When one of the doctors came out, Amara rushed forward. "Is the baby okay?" she asked breathlessly. The doctor nodded slowly. "She's cold and a bit dehydrated, but she's going to make it. You found her just in time." Relief washed over Amara so strongly that her knees almost gave out. "Thank God," she whispered, wiping tears from her eyes. They asked her questions: where she found the baby, what time, if she'd seen anyone nearby. She answered everything as best she could, but all she could think about was the tiny face she had just seen. That little girl had been left alone in the cold with no one to protect her. The thought broke something inside Amara. Later that night, after giving her statement to the police, she walked back into the nursery. The baby was lying inside a small glass crib, wrapped in a warm pink blanket now, sleeping peacefully under the soft lights. Amara stood there for a long time, just watching her. Something about the baby's face drew her in. She had seen many newborns before. She'd even helped deliver some at the hospital, but this one felt different. The little girl's features were delicate, her tiny nose slightly upturned, her lips soft and pink. Amara felt an unexpected warmth spread through her chest. It was as if some invisible thread was tying her heart to that small bundle of life. A nurse beside her smiled gently. "She's lucky you found her," she said. "Another hour out there and she might not have survived." Amara nodded, still staring at the baby. "I just can't stop thinking about who left her there," she murmured. "She's so small. She didn't ask for any of this," the nurse sighed. "Some people are scared. They don't know what to do. Sometimes they make terrible choices." That night, Amara couldn't sleep. She lay in her small room staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying every moment of what happened. The sound of the baby's cry, the way her tiny hand had grabbed Amara's finger, the feeling of that fragile heartbeat against her chest. It all kept echoing in her mind. She found herself wondering about the baby's parents. Who were they? What could make someone abandon their child like that? And why did Amara feel so strangely connected to her? She had found abandoned children before during her work at the hospital, but this feeling, this powerful sense of attachment, was new. It felt almost personal. The next morning, before her shift started, she stopped by the nursery again. The baby was awake this time, staring up at the ceiling with wide, curious eyes. When Amara leaned closer, the little girl turned her head slightly as if she recognized her. A small smile appeared on Amara's lips. "Hey there," she whispered softly. "You're stronger than you look, aren't you?" She gently touched the baby's hand, and the tiny fingers wrapped around hers again. A small tear rolled down Amara's cheek without her realizing it. Over the next few days, Amara visited the nursery every chance she got. The baby had no name, so the hospital staff referred to her as Baby Doe. But to Amara, she felt more real than that. She needed a name, something soft and warm like her tiny heartbeat. So she started calling her Lena, a name that simply felt right in her heart. Soon everyone at the hospital began using the name too. "How's little Lena today?" they'd ask, smiling when Amara came in. The baby's health improved quickly. Her color returned, her cries grew stronger, and her eyes seemed to follow Amara whenever she was near. It didn't take long before Amara realized she was thinking about Lena even when she wasn't at work. She'd catch herself wondering if the baby was sleeping or if she was hungry. It felt almost like a mother's instinct, though she didn't fully understand why. Weeks passed, and despite efforts from the police, no one came forward to claim the baby. No relatives, no leads, no clues. The story appeared briefly in the local newspaper, "Newborn found abandoned near hospital," but it quickly disappeared under newer headlines. Only Amara kept thinking about it night after night. One evening, as she watched Lena sleep through the glass window of the nursery, she whispered quietly, "Don't worry, little one. You're safe now. You're not alone anymore." She didn't know it then, but that moment marked the beginning of something far greater than she could have ever imagined. A mystery that would soon uncover secrets buried deep in her own past. The night she found that baby wasn't just a twist of fate. It was the start of a story that would change both of their lives forever. Days turned into weeks after the night Amara found the baby. The memory of that rainy evening still replayed in her mind every time she closed her eyes. The baby, now called Lena, was getting stronger each day. Her once tiny, weak cries had turned into soft, steady coos that filled the hospital nursery with life. Amara couldn't help but feel drawn to her. Every spare moment she got, she would find herself walking toward the nursery, pretending she was just checking in. But deep down, she knew the truth. She wanted to see Lena. She wanted to make sure the little girl was okay, that she wasn't alone. It started with short visits during breaks. She'd peek through the glass window and smile when she saw the baby sleeping. Then it became longer. She'd stay for minutes, sometimes even hours, talking softly to the child, humming lullabies, holding her tiny hand through the blanket. There was something about Lena that made her heart ache in the sweetest way. Other nurses began to notice. "You've really taken a liking to that baby," one of them said one morning, smiling kindly. Amara laughed softly, a bit embarrassed. "I guess I have," she admitted. "I don't know why, but I feel like she's part of me somehow." The nurse nodded knowingly. Sometimes hearts recognize each other before the mind does. That sentence stuck with her. A few days later, when her shift ended late at night, Amara stayed behind again. The hospital was quiet, the hallways dimly lit. She tiptoed into the nursery and saw Lena sleeping peacefully, her tiny chest rising and falling in rhythm. Amara pulled up a chair beside the crib and sat down, resting her chin on her arms. You've been through so much already, little one, she whispered softly. But you're safe now. I promise you that. As she spoke, Lena's fingers twitched and her small hand reached out, curling around Amara's finger. It was such a simple thing, that little touch, but it melted her completely. She felt tears well up in her eyes. You really trust me, don't you? She whispered. I'll never let anything hurt you again. The next morning, the social services representative came to the hospital. They were handling Lena's case, trying to find any information about her family. But every lead went nowhere. No birth records, no missing child reports, nothing. It was as if the baby had appeared out of thin air. Amara sat with the officer during the meeting, listening quietly. What will happen to her if no one comes forward? She asked. The officer sighed. If no relatives are found, she'll be placed in temporary foster care until adoption paperwork can begin. Amara felt her heart drop. She didn't know why, but the idea of Lena being taken somewhere else filled her with panic. Can I apply to foster her? She blurted out, surprising even herself. The officer raised an eyebrow. You? Yes, Amara said firmly. I have a stable job, a place to live, and I'm already familiar with her medical needs. Please, at least think about it. They told her it wasn't impossible, but it would take time. Background checks, home inspections, paperwork. Still, Amara didn't back down. She filled out every form, attended every interview, and made sure the process moved forward. Weeks turned into months, and in that time, her bond with Lena grew stronger. Every morning when Amara walked into the nursery, Lena's eyes would light up. She would stretch her tiny arms out, kicking excitedly, and Amara's heart would melt all over again. She talked to her about everything, her day, her dreams, even her loneliness. There was something healing about holding that baby close, like every piece of emptiness inside her was slowly being filled with love. At home, Amara started preparing her small apartment just in case the adoption was approved. She bought a used crib, a few toys, and tiny baby clothes. She painted the corner of her living room in soft pastel colors, turning it into a cozy space just for Lena. Her friends teased her gently. You're acting like a mom already, one said. Amara smiled shyly. Maybe I am. I can't explain it. It just feels right. There were nights when she would lie awake thinking about the strange connection she felt. Sometimes she would look at old photos of herself as a baby, wondering if maybe somewhere she had a sibling she never knew about. It was just a random thought, or so she believed. One day when she came to work, she found Lena crying harder than usual. A nurse explained that the baby had been fussy all morning and refused to be comforted. But the moment Amara entered the room and spoke softly, the crying stopped. Lena looked up at her and blinked, her eyes wide and calm. Everyone noticed it. She knows your voice, one nurse said with a smile. Amara lifted Lena gently, cradling her against her chest. It's okay, she whispered. I'm here. That small moment confirmed everything she already knew. They belonged together. After a few more weeks, the official approval came. Amara was granted permission to foster Lena while the adoption process continued. The day she brought the baby home was one of the happiest days of her life. Her apartment felt different that evening. Warmer, fuller, alive. She placed Lena in her new crib, softly humming a tune as she tucked her in. For the first time in a long while, Amara didn't feel lonely. There was life, laughter, and love under her roof. The nights were not easy at first. Lena woke up often, crying to be fed or held. Amara, though exhausted from work, never complained. She'd pick the baby up, rock her gently, whispering stories into the dark until the tiny eyes closed again. Sometimes, while holding her, Amara would wonder if this was how her own mother once looked at her. One night, as she rocked Lena to sleep, Amara caught her reflection in the window. The baby's small head rested against her shoulder, their faces side by side. For a brief second, something about the reflection startled her. They looked so much alike. The same shape of the nose, the same curve of the eyebrows. She laughed softly, shaking her head. Maybe it's just my imagination, she said aloud. But deep inside, a quiet curiosity began to grow. The following days passed peacefully. Amara managed to balance her work and her new role as a foster mother. People at the hospital admired her dedication. You've changed, one of her colleagues said kindly. You seem happier now. I am, she replied with a smile. I finally feel like I'm where I'm supposed to be. Sometimes, during their walks in the park, strangers would stop her and say, "She looks so much like you." Amara would smile politely, but those words always stayed in her mind. At night, after putting Lena to bed, she would sit by the crib and think, could it be just coincidence? Or was there something more? She tried to brush off the thought, but her heart wouldn't let it go. One afternoon, as she was sorting through Lena's hospital records, she noticed something unusual. The baby's blood type was listed on the medical file, and it was the same rare blood type as hers. That detail stopped her cold. Her heart started beating faster. Of course it could be a coincidence, she told herself. But what were the odds? That evening, she couldn't focus on anything else. The thought circled in her mind like a whisper she couldn't silence. She even called the hospital lab the next day, pretending to ask a routine question. Is it possible for two unrelated people to have the same rare blood type? She asked casually. It's possible, the lab technician said, but uncommon. Usually people who share that type are related somehow. Amara thanked her and hung up. Her hands trembling slightly. That night, she watched Lena sleeping, the small chest rising and falling, the tiny lips parted slightly. Who are you really? She whispered softly. Why do I feel like you're part of me? She didn't have the answers yet, but she could feel something powerful waiting beneath the surface, something that connected them in ways she didn't yet understand. Lena stirred in her sleep and reached out a hand. Amara gently took it, holding it against her heart. Whatever this is, she whispered, we'll face it together. Outside, the city lights flickered softly through the window. The world was quiet except for the rhythm of two hearts, one small, one grown, beating as if they had been meant to find each other all along. Months passed, and life slowly settled into a rhythm for Amara and Lena. The apartment that once felt cold and quiet was now filled with soft giggles, baby toys scattered on the floor, and the sound of lullabies humming late into the night. Amara had grown used to the sleepless nights, the early mornings, and the constant laundry. But she didn't mind any of it. Every smile from Lena made it all worth it. She had learned how to read the baby's moods, how to soothe her with a gentle hum or a silly face. Sometimes she'd sit on the couch holding Lena close while the evening sunlight poured through the window, painting their faces gold. In those moments, Amara felt something she had never known before. Complete peace. Still, in the quiet moments, questions lingered in her mind. Where had this child really come from? Who were her parents? And why did Amara feel such a powerful bond that seemed to go beyond love, something that felt like destiny? One evening, while cleaning out an old drawer at home, Amara stumbled upon her own adoption papers. She had always known she was adopted, but she'd never paid much attention to the details. Her parents had told her they found her through an agency when she was a baby, and that was the end of it. But as she looked at the faded documents, curiosity got the better of her. Her eyes scanned the papers carefully. Date of birth, place of discovery, hospital records, and then one line stopped her completely. Found abandoned near Riverside Community Clinic. Her chest tightened. That was just a few miles away from the same area where she had found Lena. She sat still, staring at the words, her mind spinning. Could it really be just a coincidence? She put the papers down and stood by the window, looking out into the night. The wind brushed against the curtains as if whispering something she couldn't quite hear. No, she said softly to herself. It can't be. But deep inside, a small voice whispered that maybe, just maybe it could. The next day, at work, she couldn't shake the thought. When Lena had been checked into the hospital months ago, Amara remembered seeing her test results. Blood type AB negative, a very rare one. She had the exact same blood type. The memory made her stomach twist. That evening, after putting Lena to sleep, she sat on the couch with her laptop and began searching for DNA testing options. It felt strange even to think about it, but the more she tried to dismiss the idea, the stronger her curiosity became. Finally, she filled out the online form for a home DNA test kit, hands trembling slightly. When the kit arrived a few days later, Amara hesitated before opening it. She looked at Lena, sitting on the floor with her toys, babbling happily to herself. Maybe I'm being crazy, she murmured. But I need to know. She carefully followed the instructions, collecting samples for both of them. As she sealed the envelope and prepared to mail it back, she whispered, "Whatever happens, we'll face it together." The following weeks felt painfully slow. Amara tried to focus on work and on Lena, but every time she checked her email, her heart raced. What if it was just coincidence? What if she was overthinking everything? But what if it wasn't? Then one morning, while feeding Lena breakfast, her phone buzzed. She glanced down and froze. The email was there. "Your DNA results are ready." Her hands shook as she opened it. She scrolled slowly, reading each line carefully, her eyes widening as she reached the conclusion. Probability of a biological relationship: 99.9%. Full sibling match. Her breath caught. She reread the words again and again, but they didn't change. Full sibling match. Not cousin, not relative. Full sister. Tears filled her eyes, but she couldn't move. It felt like the world had stopped spinning. The baby she had found in the trash wasn't just some random child she had rescued. She was her twin sister. She sat there in silence, holding the phone tightly. Her thoughts ran wild. How was this even possible? Had their mother abandoned both of them? Why had no one ever told her she had a twin? That night when Lena finally fell asleep, Amara sat in the dim light staring at her tiny face. The same nose, the same faint dimple on the right cheek, the same shape of eyes. And how had she not seen it before? Tears rolled down her cheeks as she whispered, "You're my sister, my baby sister." But the discovery brought as much confusion as joy. The truth was buried somewhere in her past, and she needed answers. The next morning, she called her adoptive parents. They lived in another town and had always been kind and loving, though they rarely spoke about the time before her adoption. When her mother answered, Amara's voice was shaky. "Mom, I need to ask you something important." There was a pause on the other end. "Of course, dear. What's wrong? Do you remember how I was adopted?" Her mother hesitated. "We were told you were found abandoned near a clinic. You know that?" "Yes," Amara said softly. "But did the agency ever mention another baby? A twin?" The silence that followed was heavy. "A twin?" Her mother repeated, her voice trembling. "No. Why do you ask that?" Amara swallowed hard. "Because I found a baby months ago, and she's my twin sister." "The DNA test confirmed it," her mother gasped. "That's impossible. We were told only one baby survived." "Survived?" Amara repeated, her heart pounding. Her mother began to cry. "Your birth mother. She was young, scared, and alone. They said she had twins, but one didn't make it. That's all they told us." Amara sat in stunned silence, her hand covering her mouth. So the truth had been hidden all along. One baby had been adopted and the other had been left behind, until fate brought them back together. After a long, emotional conversation, her adoptive mother finally said, "Maybe it's time you found her. Your birth mother. Maybe she deserves to know what happened." That night, Amara couldn't sleep. She sat by Lena's crib thinking about everything her mother had said. Who was this woman who had given birth to them? What had happened all those years ago? A few days later, she began her search. She contacted the adoption agency that handled her case and requested access to the old records. It wasn't easy. The files were decades old and mostly incomplete. But she persisted. Weeks passed before she finally received a thin envelope in the mail. Inside was a single page with a name written in faded ink. Evelyn R. Danner. Her hands trembled as she read the name aloud. Evelyn. The paper included an old address in a nearby town. Amara didn't know if the woman still lived there, but she knew one thing. She had to find her. That weekend, she packed a small bag, strapped Lena into her car seat, and started the drive. Her heart pounded the entire way. What would she say? How would the woman react? When she arrived, she found a small, worn-down house at the end of a quiet street. Flowers grew wild in the front yard. An elderly woman was sitting on the porch, staring into the distance. Amara stepped out of the car slowly, her heart racing. "Excuse me," she said softly. "Are you Evelyn?" The woman looked up. Her eyes widened as if she were seeing a ghost. "Yes," she whispered. "Who are you?" Amara hesitated, clutching Lena against her chest. "My name is Amara. I think you're my mother." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then the woman's lips trembled, and tears began to fall down her wrinkled cheeks. "My baby," she whispered, her voice breaking. "My babies." Amara stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. Evelyn slowly reached out a shaking hand toward Lena. "She looks just like you did," she said through sobs. "I thought you both were gone. They told me you died." Amara's throat tightened. They lied, she whispered. We lived. And we found each other. The old woman cried harder, covering her face with her hands. I never stopped thinking about you. Every night I prayed you were safe. Amara knelt beside her, holding her hand. You don't have to wonder anymore, she said gently. We're here now. That day, the pieces of a long-buried story began to come together. A story of loss, fear, and love that had survived despite everything. And as the sun began to set behind the old house, Amara finally understood. Fate had brought her to that alley for a reason. It hadn't been an accident. It had been a reunion written by life itself. Amara didn't know what to expect when she drove to that little town, but what she found there changed everything she thought she knew about her life. The woman sitting on the porch, her mother, was older and frailer than she had imagined. Her hair was streaked with gray and her eyes carried the weight of years of guilt and sadness. When Amara whispered, "We're here now," Evelyn's tears didn't stop. She stood slowly, her knees shaking, and reached out as if afraid that the woman and the baby standing before her might disappear. I can't believe this is real, she said, her voice trembling. I thought I'd never see either of you again. Amara swallowed hard, trying to hold back her own tears. You're not dreaming, she said softly. We're real. I found her. I found Lena. Evelyn's eyes moved to the baby in Amara's arms. For a long moment she just stared, her lips quivering, her hands clutching her chest. Then she whispered, She looks just like you did when you were born. Amara smiled faintly. That's because she's my twin. Evelyn nodded slowly, still in disbelief. She invited them inside, her hands shaking as she poured tea. The house was small but warm, filled with little things that spoke of a simple life, family photos, old books, a faded couch, and a vase of wildflowers on the table. They sat in silence for a while, the air heavy with emotion. Finally, Amara broke the silence. Why did it happen, Mom? Why were we separated? Evelyn's hands trembled around her cup. She stared down, her voice barely above a whisper. Because I was scared, she said. And because I believed a lie. Amara leaned forward, her heart pounding. A lie? Evelyn nodded slowly. I was only 19 when I had you. I had no family left. My parents had passed away and I was living on the streets for a while. When I found out I was pregnant, I didn't know what to do. I tried to take care of myself, but I was sick and hungry most of the time. When the time came, I gave birth at a small charity clinic near the river. The doctor said there were complications and you both came early. She paused, taking a shaky breath. You were so tiny, both of you. I remember holding you for just a few seconds before they took you away. Then one of the nurses came back and told me that one of the babies hadn't survived. Amara's chest tightened. And you believed them? Evelyn nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. I was heartbroken. I didn't even have the strength to ask questions. They told me one baby would be placed in care because I had no home, no money. They said it was the best chance for you to live. I thought I was doing the right thing by letting you go. She covered her face with her hands. I didn't know they were lying. I didn't know both of you had survived. Amara sat there quietly, letting the words sink in. It was so hard to imagine. Her mother, young and terrified, left alone in that clinic, believing one child was gone and the other given away. And Lena? She asked softly. What happened to her? Evelyn shook her head, her shoulders trembling. I don't know. A few weeks after I left the clinic, I tried to go back and ask about you, but it was gone. The building had shut down. No one knew where the records went. I searched for years. I even tried to find the doctor who delivered you, but he had moved away. Eventually, I gave up. She looked up with red, tired eyes. But not a day went by that I didn't think about you. I used to dream that maybe, somewhere, you were alive and happy. Amara reached across the table and took her mother's hand. I was adopted by a kind family. They loved me like their own. Evelyn let out a long breath of relief. That's all I ever wanted, she said softly. For you to be safe. Then her eyes fell on Lena again. And her? How did you find her? Amara hesitated, her throat tightening. I found her in the trash behind a bakery one night. Evelyn's face went pale. No, she whispered. Please don't tell me someone. She's okay now, Amara said quickly. She's healthy and loved. But yes, she was left there. Evelyn pressed her trembling hands to her mouth, her whole body shaking. History repeated itself, she whispered through tears. She could have died just like you almost did. How could this happen again? Amara moved closer and wrapped her arm around her. It's over now, she said gently. She's safe. We're together. They sat there in silence, both crying softly. Later that afternoon, Evelyn brought out a small wooden box from her bedroom. There's something I want to show you, she said. Inside were a few old photographs. One of her when she was young, smiling shyly, and another of two tiny newborns wrapped in hospital blankets. The photo was old and faded, but Amara could see it clearly. Two babies lying side by side, identical faces, holding hands even then. That was the only picture I had of you, Evelyn said, touching the photo gently. I carried it with me everywhere for years. When life got hard, I'd look at it and tell myself that at least one of you was alive somewhere. Amara looked at the photograph for a long time. Her eyes stung with tears. You never stopped hoping, she said softly. Evelyn shook her head. No mother ever really does. They spent the rest of the evening talking. Evelyn told her about her life after losing the babies. How she struggled to survive, took small jobs, and eventually found a small home in the same town. She never remarried, never had other children. Her heart, she said, had belonged to the two girls she lost. As the sun began to set, Amara stood by the window holding Lena while Evelyn watched them from the couch. It feels like I'm seeing a miracle, Evelyn whispered. Like life is giving me back what it once took away. Amara smiled through her tears. Maybe it is. That night, when Amara and Lena stayed over, Evelyn walked quietly into the small guest room where Amara was putting the baby to sleep. She stood in the doorway, her voice trembling. Thank you, she said, for finding her, for finding me. Amara turned, her eyes soft. You're my mother, she said simply. No matter what happened, that will never change. Evelyn stepped closer, tears glistening in her eyes. You have no idea how much I've prayed for this day. I thought I'd die without ever seeing you again. Amara hugged her tightly, and for the first time in decades, Evelyn allowed herself to cry without shame. Over the next few days, Amara visited often. She brought Lena's toys, baby food, and tiny clothes. The old house began to feel alive again with laughter, baby giggles, and the smell of home-cooked meals. Evelyn's neighbors even noticed the change. You look happier these days, one of them said. Evelyn smiled softly and replied, My family came home. But as peaceful as everything seemed, Amara still felt one question lingering in her heart. Who had abandoned Lena? If their mother hadn't known she existed, then someone else must have had her. Someone had made the decision to leave her behind. She didn't want to upset Evelyn by asking, but part of her knew she couldn't ignore the mystery forever. One evening, as she packed to leave after dinner, Evelyn touched her hand gently. There's something else you should know, she said, her tone serious. Amara turned, her heartbeat quickening. What is it? Evelyn hesitated, looking down at the floor. The day you were born, there was another woman at the clinic, a nurse. She was kind, but she seemed nervous. Later I heard she was dismissed for something, but I never found out what. I always wondered if she had something to do with what happened that day. Amara frowned. Do you remember her name? Evelyn nodded slowly. Maria Santos, Amara's mind raced. Could this woman be the missing link? The person who had taken Lena or hidden the truth? Evelyn looked up at her with sad eyes. Maybe finding her will finally give you all the answers. Amara hugged her mother goodbye that night, her heart heavy with both love and curiosity. As she drove home, the streetlights passed by one, casting soft glows through her car window. Lena slept peacefully in the back seat, unaware of the storm of emotions her sister was feeling. Amara glanced at her through the mirror and whispered, We've come this far. I'll find out what really happened. For you, for me, for her. The road stretched endlessly ahead, but for the first time she didn't feel lost. She was following the trail of truth, a truth that had waited more than 2 decades to be found. The drive home that night felt long and quiet. The air outside was cool, and the hum of the car engine was the only sound breaking the silence. Amara kept glancing at Lena in the back seat, watching her small chest rise and fall as she slept peacefully. That calm face reminded her why she had started this journey in the first place. To protect her, to love her, and now, to uncover the truth of how fate had brought them together again. But her mother's words about the nurse named Maria stayed in her mind. The name kept echoing like a whisper that refused to fade. Amara knew she couldn't rest until she found out who Maria was, and what role she played in the story that had separated her from her twin. The next morning, after dropping Lena off with a trusted friend from the hospital, Amara drove back to the small town where her mother had once given birth. The clinic where she and Lena were born no longer existed, but a small medical center stood in its place. She parked the car, walked up to the reception desk, and politely asked the clerk if they had any archived records or contacts from the old Riverside Community Clinic. The clerk shook her head. Most of the old files were destroyed when the clinic shut down, she said. But some of the staff from back then still live around here. There's one woman, Maria Santos. She used to be a nurse there. She runs a small care home now just a few streets away. Amara's heart began to race. Thank you, she said quickly, scribbling down the address. It didn't take long to find the place, a quiet one-story house surrounded by tall trees and flowers. A small wooden sign near the door read Sunrise Home Care. As she stood there, Amara took a deep breath. She didn't know what she was walking into, but she knew she had to do it. She knocked on the door. A few moments later, a woman in her late 60s opened it. Her hair was streaked with silver, her eyes calm but curious. Yes, she asked softly. Are you Maria Santos? Amara asked. The woman hesitated, then nodded. Yes, that's me. Do I know you? Amara took a deep breath. You might not remember me. My name is Amara. I was born at the Riverside Clinic about 24 years ago. My mother's name was Evelyn. The woman's expression changed instantly. Her eyes widened, her breath caught in her throat. Evelyn, she repeated quietly, her hand trembling slightly. You're her daughter? Amara nodded. I am. And I think you might know something about what happened that day, about the twins. Maria turned pale. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then she quietly said, Come in. The house smelled faintly of lavender. The walls were lined with photos of patients and certificates from years ago. Maria led Amara to the small kitchen and poured 2 cups of tea, her hands shaking the whole time. I've waited a long time for someone to come, Maria finally said, sitting down. But I never thought it would be one of the girls. Amara leaned forward, her voice soft but firm. Please. I need to know what really happened. Maria sighed deeply, as if releasing a secret she had carried for decades. Your mother was young and frightened. The hospital where she delivered you didn't have enough staff that night, so I was helping the doctor. There were 2 of you, both small, both struggling to breathe. After the birth, your mother fainted. The doctor was exhausted. He handed me both babies and told me to check them. When I looked again, one of you wasn't crying. She paused, her eyes filling with tears. We thought she was gone. The doctor told me to take her away and handle the paperwork quietly so the mother wouldn't be traumatized. But just as I wrapped the baby, she gasped and started breathing again. Amara's eyes widened. That was Lena? Maria nodded, her lips trembling. Yes, but by the time I realized it, the doctor had already written the report. 1 baby alive, 1 deceased. I panicked. I was afraid to tell him I'd made a mistake. I thought I'd lose my job. So I took the baby and told a local shelter about her. They promised they'd find her a home. Tears streamed down Amara's cheeks. You didn't tell anyone? Maria shook her head, shame covering her face. I wanted to. But when the clinic closed months later, everything disappeared. Records, staff, everything. I tried to find her once years later, but there was no trace. I thought maybe she'd been adopted. I didn't know she ended up... Her voice broke. In the trash. Amara sat there speechless. Part of her wanted to be angry, but another part saw the guilt written all over Maria's face. This woman had carried her mistake like a stone in her heart for decades. I didn't mean for it to happen, Maria whispered, her voice shaking. Every day I prayed that both of you were safe somewhere. Amara wiped her tears and looked at her kindly. You made a mistake, yes. But if it weren't for fate, we might never have found each other again. Maybe this was how life meant it to be, so we could meet again now. Maria covered her face with her hands and began to cry. You're so much like your mother, she said through tears. After that day, Amara visited her mother again and told her everything. Evelyn cried silently as she listened, her hands clutching Amara's. So that's what happened, she whispered. All those years I blamed myself, but it wasn't me. It was all just a tragic mix of fear and mistakes. Amara nodded, her voice thick with emotion. But we're all together now. That's what matters, Evelyn smiled weakly. Yes, together again. Life slowly began to settle into something peaceful. Evelyn became part of Amara and Lena's lives. She'd visit often, bringing small gifts and homemade meals. Sometimes she would just sit on the floor playing with Lena, laughter echoing through the house. It was as if time itself was trying to make up for what it had taken away. As the months went by, Lena grew stronger and more curious. She'd crawl around the living room, babbling happily, her laughter filling every corner of the apartment. Every time Amara looked at her, she saw the face of the baby she once was, and the sister she almost never got to meet. One evening, as the sun set outside their window, Amara sat with her mother watching Lena play. You know, Evelyn said quietly, when I was young I used to dream of seeing both of you together. I never thought it would actually happen. Amara smiled softly. Sometimes life takes the long way around to make things right. Evelyn reached out and held her hand. Promise me you'll tell Lena the truth when she's older. Not the pain, but the miracle of it. Let her know she wasn't abandoned by love, but found by it. Amara nodded. I promise. Years passed, and the bond between them only grew stronger. Lena learned to walk, to talk, and to laugh the same bright laugh that Amara had when she was little. They visited Evelyn every weekend, and Maria sometimes sent letters, small notes of apology and blessings for the sisters she could never forget. When Lena turned 5, she asked one night, How did you find me? Amara smiled, tucking her into bed. I was walking home one night and I heard you crying. I followed the sound and found you waiting for me. Waiting for you? The little girl repeated, her eyes wide. Yes, Amara said softly, brushing her hair back. Because we were meant to find each other. We were never really apart, Lena smiled sleepily. Then you're my hero? Amara laughed gently. No, little one. You're mine. That night, as Amara watched her sister sleep, she thought back to everything that had happened. The rain-soaked alley, the hospital nursery, the long nights filled with questions, and the incredible journey that brought truth to light. She realized that the story wasn't about tragedy anymore. It was about hope, forgiveness, and the mysterious ways love could guide lost hearts back to one another. And as the years went on, every time she told their story, she ended it the same way, with the words she had whispered to Lena the night she brought her home for the first time. You were never lost. You were always meant to be found. Years later, Amara often looked back and wondered how one ordinary night had changed everything. What if she hadn't walked down that alley? What if she hadn't heard that faint cry from the trash bin? Sometimes she couldn't even believe it herself, that the baby she found there turned out to be her own twin sister. Life had moved on since then, yet the memory never faded. It was now a quiet story that lived inside her heart, a story she shared not with sadness but with gratitude. Lena was 8 now. She was full of life, bright and curious, always asking questions about the world. She loved painting, singing, and making up stories about brave sisters who never gave up on each other. Every time Amara heard her laugh, it reminded her how precious that sound was, a sound that might never have existed if things had gone differently. Evelyn, their mother, had grown older, but she was at peace. The guilt that once haunted her had softened into something else, pride and healing. Every weekend, the sisters visited her. Evelyn would sit in her rocking chair, telling Lena gentle stories about courage, kindness, and second chances. One afternoon, while they were sitting together in the garden, Lena asked a question that made both women pause. Mom, she said, looking at Amara with her big brown eyes, when I was a baby, why was I in the trash? The air grew still. Amara looked at Evelyn, then back at Lena. She didn't want to lie, but she also didn't want to fill her young mind with the pain of that night. She took a deep breath and said softly, Because sometimes people make mistakes, sweetheart. But what matters is that love always finds a way to fix them. Lena frowned slightly. So, you found me because love told you to? Amara smiled and touched her cheek. Yes, exactly that. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of warmth. She leaned forward and said, You were never thrown away, my darling. The world just took a long way to bring you back home. Lena thought about that for a moment, then grinned. Then the world did a good job. They all laughed softly, the sound blending with the quiet rustle of the wind. As the years went by, Amara turned their story into something meaningful. She began speaking at community centers and hospitals, telling people about hope, adoption, and the power of compassion. She never mentioned details that would hurt anyone, only the lessons she had learned. That love could come from the darkest places, and that family was sometimes something you found rather than something you were born into. People listened, cried, and hugged her afterward. Many said her story gave them courage to start again, to forgive or to reach out to someone they had lost touch with. Amara always ended her talks with the same words. You never know what miracle might be waiting just around the corner. Maybe even crying softly, hoping you'll listen. One evening, years later, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, Amara, Lena, and Evelyn sat on the porch together. Lena was painting the sunset, her small hands moving carefully across the paper. Evelyn smiled as she watched her grandchild, because that's what Lena was to her now, full of light and joy. She turned to Amara and whispered, "You gave her a future. You gave me peace." "Thank you," Amara shook her head gently. "No, Mom, you gave us life. We just found our way back to you." Evelyn took her hand and squeezed it softly. "Maybe that's what love really means," she said. "Finding each other again, no matter how long it takes." That night, as Amara tucked Lena into bed, the little girl whispered, "Can you tell me the story again? The one where the big sister found the baby?" Amara smiled and began, her voice soft like a lullaby. "Once upon a time, a girl was walking home on a rainy night when she heard a tiny cry. And as she spoke, her heart filled with the same feeling it had on that night, a mix of shock, love, and destiny. The story that had once been filled with pain was now filled with light. Because in the end, it wasn't just about finding a baby in the trash, it was about finding family. It was about finding hope, and most of all, it was about finding herself.